morning. Welcome, everybody, to the Benefits of Inclusive RRI session. I think that we heard already, we learned quite a lot about RRI this morning. We learned about the many challenges that RRI is going to face if we want RRI to shape our future. I think that it was extremely useful to see how many people this morning talked about the importance of engagement, engaging society in the debate of research and innovation. We need to engage with end users and with society in general if we want RRI to find a way to be implemented, to find a way to enter the real world. And for RRI to be meaningful and transformational, for RRI to move from word to deed, we need to reach out to all the stakeholders involved in the innovation process, and we need to ask to all actors involved to take responsibility for this. We want to engage with all the groups and all stakeholders, because engagement is going to be the element that is going to make innovation ethical, societally desirable and effective. And engagement is going to be also the way in which the innovation process is going to offer the possibility to end users to become co-creator and to participate actively in the process since the first stages. And engagement is also the element that is going to open up new markets possibilities. So it's going to be good for industry as well. It's going to produce value. And in the tradition of progress, I would like today to, if you allow me, to take you on a trip to the world and back to show you how RRI can be inclusive and successful in Europe and outside Europe. And I would like to start with Professor David Kaplan, that is a professor of business and government relations and professor of economics at University of Cape Town. Professor Kaplan is going to tell us about inclusive innovation, and he has a particular interest in innovation that led him to work and collaborate with the National Advisory Council on Innovation in South Africa. Please.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Francesca, and good morning to everybody here. Thank you for the chance to be here and to talk to you. I take my task today as being to try to put some flesh onto what is this inclusive innovation, why it's important, what we can learn from it, and also how we can link up to it, particularly how RRI can link to inclusive innovation. So that's my task. So let me start off by really talking about inclusive innovation and trying to give it some concrete application, if you like. So inclusive innovation, which is now widely talked about, also you will see it in some alternative forms. You'll see it sometimes talked about as pro-poor innovation, frugal innovation. You'll see it as talked as bottom of the pyramid innovation, particularly bottom of the pyramid in the corporate sector. So it's a widely used term. You'll find the international financial institutions, the World Bank, even the IMF, you'll find it embedded in their views on innovation, how to support innovation. Donors are increasingly interested in it. Academia, more and more students engaged in it, more and more research in this. If you look at the word counts in research, you'll find this is a very rising area. Research organizations funded by public bodies, and business and industry. So this is a widely disseminated term. What does it mean concretely, and what does it mean concretely for developing countries and in developing countries? And that's what I want to say something about. So I think we can think about it in three dimensions. In essence, innovations that are relevant to the poor, relevant, whatever relevance means, we unpack that are relevant to the poor, we give the term inclusive innovation. Now, I think we can divide this into three dimensions. The first dimension is the impact of innovation that enhances the consumption and or the incomes of the poor. So these are innovations that really help the poor, if you like, increase their incomes, their consumption possibilities. In this definition of innovation, of inclusive innovation, the poor are passive recipients of innovations that will occur. So the innovations occur, the poor get benefit from them, but they are not actively participant. Second dimension, we can think about poor or poor consumers or poor producers as acquiring capacities to identify and absorb innovative solutions to their problems. So here you think about education and training, etc., that allows for absorption, and allows the poor to have greater capacities to absorb and potentially to innovate. And the third dimension is where the poor are themselves actively involved directly in the development of innovative solutions to their own problems. And we're going to see that with one of our later speakers just now, that third dimension of innovation. So those are the three dimensions, if you like. We can also think about inclusive innovation as operating at three levels. There's product innovation, there's process innovation, and there's social innovation. Let me give quick examples of each. The product innovation, you will have seen many, but there are many examples of such. Affordable refrigerators. Look at the price differentiations here. We're starting to see new innovative products that are substantially cheaper. But it's not just the cheapness that's important, it's also the robustness, it's the way that they innovated and so that they can be applied in more difficult situations. So a fridge, for example, that isn't dependent on a consistent electricity supply. Something that's better adapted. So part of the inclusiveness is in the lower price, but much of it's also to the adaptation of the environment in which poor consumers find themselves. And we see here a pre-screening ophthalmology device, etc. Many examples. But look at the price differentiation. It's becoming possible through innovation to really develop products that really are of critical importance in this area, obviously health, at a fraction of the cost, just 10% of current machines. So that kind of gets the headlines, and you will have seen much of that. But I think even more important and gets much less headlines are the process innovations. So these are innovations that allow for poor producers to enter the market as producers or to become much more productive. And I'll just give one example here. This is a tiller for agriculture, a small tiller, up to 25 horsepower, produced by a company, Greaves, in India. And this allows small farmers to have active tilling processes which have dramatic impact on their agricultural production. And across the sphere, we see, particularly from China, but also from India, from Brazil, some other countries, but most particularly from China, a whole set of new machines, new technologies that allow people to get into sewing, into cutting of cloth, into bending of metals, into a whole variety of production processes, because they now have capital equipment that is much cheaper, much more robust, and much easier for the applications that they need. So substantial increases to their productivity and to their possibility of getting into those trades in the first place. In economic terms, we talk about the barriers to entry being much lower because machines and technologies are now available which are much lower priced. And then there is the social innovation. And what we are seeing in a number of developing countries, this is just an example from India, are new innovation institutions and practices that directly address the needs of the poor. And here, this is the honeybee network in India, here we are talking about the actual inclusion of poor people into the process of innovation itself, defining what is needed, what they need, and how they themselves as end users and as beneficiaries can be involved in the innovative process. Here we're talking about empowerment through innovation. So you can see these different dimensions and how important this can be. So innovation at this last level, consumers, poor consumers, are no longer just passive recipients. They're active participants, if you like, in the process of innovation itself. And the institutions that allow that to happen, like the Honeybee Network, have become very critical. So that's in very brief terms, to me, how I would think about inclusive innovation. Very critical, very important, particularly in the Asian context, but increasingly in the Latin American context and now in the African context. So what's happening, I think, very broadly, is that the corporate sector is recognizing that there is money to be made. Why? Because there are now millions of poor consumers coming into the marketplace who still are poor but now have disposable income. Each individual is poor, but collectively they have a large buying power. And innovation often follows, at least for the corporates, of course, follows the market. And so we see the corporates increasingly, if you look at GE's latest reports, you look at all of them, they're all saying we need to innovate in developing country context, emerging market context, because this is where the next billions are going to come from. They're all engaged there. But we also see, of course, that third world countries and third world country firms are increasingly innovating for their own poor people. And on the basis of their innovation, we're also starting to see third world firms become very competitive with some of the firms from industrialized countries. What we're not seeing yet, I think, is sufficient recognition on the part of state actors, of donors, and I think really of the EU itself, if I could say, that we need to incorporate and understand this issue of inclusive innovation and incorporate it actively into what we do. So I think the message we want to bring home, I think perhaps are two. One is that the RRI, for all of its benefits, etc., and it is actually very conducive to inclusive innovation. But RRI needs more actively and more systematically, I think, to incorporate inclusive innovation in its activities and its systems. I don't think it does that yet adequately, and there obviously we can carry that discussion forward, but I think that needs to be done. On the other levels, I think we also need, critically, we need tools. What do we mean by benefit to the poor? How might we measure that? How might we evaluate whether an innovation actually is to the benefit of the poor? And what are the ways in which measurement and evaluation can be affected? Because unless we know that, it becomes very difficult to fund this in a systematic kind of way, to fund and support these sorts of activities. So there are challenges there, I think, in devolving and understanding what it means to fund inclusive innovation and how we would measure whether such funding and support has in fact been effective. And I'll close it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, for explaining us what inclusive innovation means and how RRI can be inclusive. And we stay in South Africa, and I'm going to hand over to Reverend Mario Mahongo. Mario is the chairperson for the San community in South Africa, and is also the vice chairperson for the South African San Council, and is also the chairperson for, and I'm sorry for the pronunciation, for the Kun and the Kwe San Communal Property Association. Please, Mario. Mario will be talking in Afrikaans, and Henny Swart, that is the director of the SASI, the NGO that is helping the San people in the South Africa, will be translating for us. Thank you.
Goeiemorgen. Dank u weer eens dat ons met u kan deel hoekom dat ons hier is. En ik ga meer praten over die secretium, zoals wat ik nog voor jullie andere kant gezegd. Dat die San heeft die secretium plant voor die baie jaar gebruikt. Ons ken die secretium plant ook als die kauwgoed. Kauwgoed is een woord in Afrikaans. En dit is maar die goed wat je aan elkaar kauw. Dit was gebruikt voor die kinders wat tante krijgen en ander gemoedstoestanden. Dit is niet verslavend nie. Dit lag die gemoedstand. Hier is een voorbeeld van die traditionele kennis wat die San het aan termen van die planten. Zoals wat je laat dit zien.
Thank you. Good morning. In the previous session, we did mention that we will refer to the specific case study on the Scaletium plant. The San have used Scaletium in different forms. It's also known as kauwgoed, which means something to chew, and it was used for children with teething and other grumpy moods. It is not addictive, it lifts mood and enhances a feeling of well-being. This is an example of traditional knowledge we as a San have about plants.
In 2000 het hier navors die Scaletium plant begin ondersoek. En baie aanligting is aangesamel by die San as ook die NAMA mense van die Suid-Afrika. Daar is veral gekyk na die antidepressante waarde van die plant en patent is geregistreer op hierdie plant.
In 2000, a researcher investigated and researched the antidepressant qualities of the plant. Numerous consultations and data was collected within the San and the Nama communities in South Africa. A patent was registered.
Maatskappy met die naam HGH het die plant begin toets en het organisa nie afhanklik of verslewende pil ontwikkel wat depressie teen werk. Die maatskappy het die kwekery gebou en die produk getoets op diere en mense.
A company called HG&H Pharmaceuticals started to test the plant for its organic, non-addictive and antidepressant qualities. A pill was developed. The company developed nurseries and tested the product on humans and animals.
En die eerste toets is die volgende bevind. Die 1, die produk is veilig. 2, die produk help met die verstandelike funksies. 3, die produk help om angs teen te werk aan mense.
In the early clinical trials, it was tested and following results were documented. The product is safe, the product improves cognitive function, and the product decreases anxiety.
Die maatskappy wat die navorsing en ontwikkeling gedoen het 'n ooreenkoms met die SAN aangegaan waaraan die SAN se kennis erken word. Die SAN het 'n ooreenkoms geteken waaraan voordele gedeel word, aangesien die SAN tradisionele kennis gebruik is. Dis aan hierdie samewerking tussen die SAN en die maatskappy ontwikkel.
The company entered into discussions with the SAN, and as the SAN is the traditional knowledge holders of the plant effects and users, and an agreement was signed between the company and the SAN. The product is endorsed by the SAN. This is an example of collaboration between the SAN and the pharmaceutical industries. A benefit-sharing agreement was signed.
Die produk is in pille vorm en is bekend as Bernd. Hy is welkom om na die website laat sê te gaan kyk. Die pil is in 2010 bekendgestel en is beskikbaar aan die Suid-Afrika, Amerika en Australië. Die proses om Zembrin aan Europa te gebruik is nog aan die proses. Hooplik dat dit sal ook uitkom. Jy sal aan die skryf sien dat dit verskillende werkings het. Gemoed verbeter, breinfunksies is beter, angstigheid verminder. Saam help dit om stres en spanning te verlig.
The product is in pill form and is available for end users known as Zembrin. We've got an example here. It was launched in 2012. You're welcome to visit the website. The product is available as Zembrin in the RSA, America and Australia. The European launches takes longer due to more stringent compliance rules in Europe. The pill has certain qualities. It enhances mood and general well-being. Cognitive functions is better, a decrease in anxiety levels, and altogether it has an effect on stress release. We do take it to ourselves every morning. It's here. I will send it around.
Ja, die maatskappy maak dit baie duidelik in hulle bemarking dat die SAN die oorspronklike kennishouers van is en dat die SAN dit baie lang gebruik het. Dit is baie veilig.
In terms of safety, the company makes it quite clear in its marketing that the plant was used by the SAN over ages. It is therefore tested over the ages and is quite safe.
Ons as die SAN sien hierdie as 'n baie goeie voorbeeld waaraan ons ou kennis gebruik kan word om nuwe produkte te ontwikkel vir die moderne wêreld waaraan ons leef. Ons deel dus ons kennis met die wêreld op 'n verantwoordelike manier. Ons is trots op hierdie voorbeeld.
We as the SAN see this as an example where our traditional knowledge and old knowledge is used into a modern product. We share our knowledge with the world and we are very proud of this initiative. This is an innovative and responsible example.
Ek wil net sê, u is welkom om ons te kontak vir meer aanligting. En ek wil net sê baie dankie dat ek weer hierdie platform met u kon deel met ons kennis as aanheemse mense van Suid-Afrika.
Reverend Mario mentions that you are welcome to contact us for more information, and he is very proud. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mario and Annie, for providing us with this inspiring example of how marginalized groups can provide new ways for innovation and inclusive innovation. And we leave South Africa and we go back to Europe and actually to Comensus, to this university-based stakeholder engagement initiatives at the University of Central Lancashire. And we are going to see an example of engagement with disabled people and service users. And we are going to have Michael McKeown introducing also our two special guests, Lisa and Jackie. Mick is a mental health nurse, he's a sociologist, and he helped setting up Comensus in the first place, and is an active member in the Comensus community. So please.
Thank you. I mean, just carrying on from Vivian this morning, and I hope I speak for all my colleagues, we don't want any association with Maggie Thatcher. But we all wish we'd had Mary Poppins as brollies this morning. So this Comensus, it's a university initiative and it's a community initiative. And it brings citizens who make a substantive use of health and social care services into the university to get involved in research, teaching and strategic decision making. So the people that we call service users and carers are, like I said, people who have a range of health and illness experiences, usually long-term conditions, but not exclusively, disabled people. And it's not just about bringing people into the university, it's about the university coming out into the community as well. So to that extent, we're really conscious about territory and sort of, if we can, flipping the space of the university so it becomes much more amenable to community, democracy and participation, but also making sure that scholars are completely visible and active within the community as well. And in that sense, it was founded as a participatory action research project. So the democratic principles and a sort of desire for authenticity in our relationships was built in from the start. And I think even if we hadn't have been thinking about those things, the fact that we were geared towards participatory processes would have enabled those principles to come forward and breathe within the project. So we've been doing this work for over a decade, and in that time, literally hundreds of individuals and numerous affiliated civil society groups have been involved. And these people have basically become a standing resource within the university, available to university scholars. So people have a research project, and they're looking for people who marry up with the focus of the research project in terms of their particular experience. We can connect them to research scholars. But we also do our own research, and we've also researched the process of what we're trying to achieve as well. So we work on principles of authenticity, dialogue and deliberation, very much in tune with this morning's presentations. And we see this as about the democratisation of research. For the community participants, the goal is to improve health and social care services in society at large. So the research itself is a means to an end, not necessarily an end in itself. So the commitment, as Lisa has said, to the democratic practices ensures that voices that are seldom heard in other quarters become the very essence of what we're about. And this, of necessity, challenges power imbalances, and it also provokes and troubles vested professional interests. So in that sense, the activity resonates with social movement activism, and many of the people involved would define themselves in those terms. And some of the academics who are involved either already were or become, in that sense, community activists as well. So there's a sort of blurring of identity boundaries. And we found that people are naturally very good at democracy. They appreciate it, and they know the value of it when they find out about it. The real pity in modern society is it seems very different to people to be involved in a process of deliberation. So it's not necessarily been their experience, either growing up or in school or in their engagement with other social institutions. But once people are offered the opportunity to have a deliberative dialogic say in important issues, issues that they see as important, they can definitely see that there's something of value there. And so while we're thinking about these diverse community voices, I'm going to pass you over to Lisa and Jackie. Lisa first.
Yeah, I'm going to go first. Sorry, technological issues. Can everyone hear me okay? Right, okay. The project which I'm going to talk about, hopefully in some detail, is was funded by Comensus in its inception, right from its very beginnings, really, and it's called Reading the World. And what we are at Reading the World, we're an asset-based creative writing programme, and we met for 2.5 hours a week for 15 weeks. And our work culminates with a final performance. But what's different about us in terms of ethical research and innovation is the notion of asset-based learning. We would meet and give positive asset-based feedback, so we wouldn't critique in the traditional fashion, because we were dealing with people, and I count myself in this list, who had been marginalised and perhaps had not always positive experiences of health and social care, so many of them wouldn't find themselves at home within a traditional university setting. So we needed a different way of engaging with those people, and the way that we chose to do that was by a means of creativity and creative writing itself. So we didn't ask engage with people in terms of, we're doing this project, can you tell us what you know about this? We got them involved in something that wasn't necessarily at first glance directly related to that in terms of creative writing, and through the use of asset-based critique. So we don't look at what might be traditionally regarded as the negative side of the things they were writing about, or indeed pathologise them as people. Reading the World was very clear about its message in terms of staying away from the notion of being a therapy. We were there to write and to learn writing techniques, and this created very strong relationships in terms of our own bonding with each other, because we were very clear to create a space of psychological safety in terms of how we engage with one another, and a very open space in terms of what we could say. So this has had many positive effects in terms of how we engage with people and the impact on the wider community. In my own experience, for example, I am a Reading the World writer. I've performed as part of the Reading the World project for about 4 years now. I would have never in my life thought that I would be on stage, let alone in a small part of Europe, talking to you guys today. But I've gone on to do those things, and as a result of my work with Comensus and Reading the World, I am now studying for my own PhD and involved very heavily in disability activism. And I cannot say that I would be doing that if it hadn't been for the involvement of Reading the World and the way I connected with the university. Because people such as myself, struggle to get educational opportunities. So, without the involvement in Reading the World, I wouldn't be certainly not sat here. It doesn't just do it for things like me, for people like me. There are other members and other writers that have been part of Reading the World that have gone on to have voluntary involvement. So they're still involved now, and also they've gone on to get places in college and things like that. And we're also beginning to write our own publications and works, and all those kind of good, positive things are happening. The key is about, I want to go back to what the principles of Comensus are about in terms of service user voice. I have, through my performances, spoken in detail about disability rights and disability equality issues, and this is something that is often not on the agenda. I think one of the key things that we do is that. As a disabled person, it's not just about, for me, the whole Reading the World experience is not just about disability. People of Reading the World are from various diverse backgrounds. So we have people with LGBT experience, we have people that have struggled with substance and alcohol misuse, and they get to talk about their experience in a setting that, due to the asset-based nature of the way we work, they're not judged, they're given the freedom and space to talk openly about their experiences and supported to do so. In terms of what we want to do for the future, we're going to engage with the School of Film, Media and Performance, and we're going to be working in what is collectively known as an interdisciplinary fashion, and teaching within the various faculties from our own perspectives. Obviously, the last key project that I want to talk about is the interdisciplinary work that we are going to do with the School of Film, Media and Performance. And we're going to be working across faculty, and this will be the first time we have done so. We're also beginning to quantify our own impact in terms of our own research. The greater majority of our work is qualitative, so we are getting the experience of the writers in terms of research context, but we're also getting feedback from those who view our performances and see our writings. We're very active within the local community, so we're speaking at conferences on subjects of equality and diversity, and indeed social pedagogy. That is the key thing I want to leave you with, the asset-based way in which we work. I think.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. Thank you for providing this example of how interdisciplinarity is a fundamental drive for improving.
It's key because you can't work. You have to work with people. You can't. It's not fair to tell them what they should be doing in a passive way, as the professor said earlier.
Great.
We want to avoid that notion of the passive recipient of research.
Thank you. And now Jacqueline Vella is our next speaker in the Comensus project. She's a Comensus member. She's a stroke survivor that is sharing her dramatic experience with other patients and is helping improving the NHS system and the healthcare for patients that have been experiencing the same dramatic moment in their life. And she's also providing help and training for patients that are living with long-term conditions. Please, Jackie.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I don't screw it up completely for you. I've been a member of Comensus now as long as it's been running, and I really love it. My life has been extended because of it, and because I live alone, I find the friendships that you make keep my sanity. I've had 4 strokes, yet I was very blessed to be chosen to chair a stroke end-user group for a research pilot called ICONS. ICONS helps stroke survivors regain their continence. The involvement of stroke patients into research needs careful management due to a number of factors: exhaustion, a death in the first year, and another one of our members going on to have a more serious stroke and being unable to continue. So continuity is not easy. I was involved at all the stages of the research process, including research design, management, strategy. It started as a feasibility study, and is now developing into a further programme of research to fine-tune the findings and extend, sorry, I have a bit of a phase here, you'll have to forgive me, and extend any benefits that can be made and improvements. The impact of ICONS improved and restored continence in many users, as only catheterisation had been previously used, so the end users rarely recovered the ability to control their continence. Suicides and psychological well-being were poor. The research places patients into 3 groups on specialist stroke wards. The original being number 1, which was catheterisation. 2 was new pelvic floor exercises to improve muscle control. And 3 was prompted voiding, helping the person to remember to go to the toilet. That was group 3. One method was used for each test group to help validate which method gave the best outcomes. The research pilot group consisted of users who had better stroke outcomes alongside end users who had poor outcomes because of aphasia. We all supported each other and we worked independently as well at times. Changes due to this outcome of research include end users' treatment being improved. Professionals were trained to support users by users themselves, which is different. It was named as a good example of when end users are involved in research and it won a national award. And finally, it brought about technological changes. But my own personal view at the end of this, but for me, it brought a reason to live and a great improvement in my own recovery. And I met lots of new friends. So thank you very much for letting me be involved in research. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie, for this valuable, priceless example of how we can we can actually create new technology and new intervention, health intervention differences in this context. Mick would like to say a few words, please.
Right, so just to tie up and conclude in terms of the benefits and the value for the organisations like the university, I suppose, you know, that there's all sorts of benefits that have been hinted at in terms of the way the value that comes out of particular projects can be cascaded back into student learning and enhance your capacity to seek further grants and such like, and ultimately improve the reputation of the university. But most of those things are not why people have got involved in the first place, as I've said. And there are some more subtle but perhaps more profound impacts that we've been interested in and that have emerged in our own study of what we've been doing. And these are more relational, they're more essential about how the very space in the university might have changed. And we might think about, if I'd have properly shown you the slides that came before rather than just flick through them at the end, we had a slide that was about a sort of cycle of change. And we think that there is a sort of virtuous cycle. And what changes most is the nature and depth of relationships. These are cooperative, and the cooperation between the university and the community grows, so the university does become more of an asset to its local community, and that's in a spirit of mutuality and reciprocity. So some university assets become available to the community because community people are involved in a way that just wouldn't have happened before. And I'm not necessarily thinking about academic assets like the library, things like the use of sports facilities. We've got a movie cinema in the university that we have begun to use in a cooperative way with the community. That said, the various research projects we've been involved in, and there have been far too many to mention here, but I'll put a list up at the end of some of them, have made a very real difference to the aspects of care and treatment that they've looked into. And like I said, some of our research has been about what we do, and I think that might inform some of the debate around RRI as well. So we think the very space of the university is relationally altered. End users now occupy this space. It's a sort of colonisation process in a good way. Different types of talk happen in committee rooms, in classrooms, in corridors, in the canteen. Some of that is scholarly talk, some of it's community talk, some of it's quite radical talk for change. A lot of it is, as Jackie's hinted at, friendship talk, sociability. When we've worked with groups like Reading the World, it's opened our eyes to extend what we do around the creative use of methods. So we've taken a turn towards using creativity and innovation in methodology and the dissemination of findings. So mobile methods, photo voice, creative writing as research method. So looking at how we analyse qualitative data and turning it into bits of creative writing, prose or poems, either alongside the person or someone else does this and takes it back to the person, and using that in a way that gets richer and better qualitative data from people that's more finely tuned to their authentic voice. And if it's working, and we often are, with very marginalised people, sometimes that's the only way to actually access the quality of information that we might be looking for. And in that sense, the boundaries between the researchers and the service users become blurred, and we all become researchers, just with different forms of expertise. And the academic research role, the identity changes. So we as scholars become much more visible in the community, and we become in the business of progressive change. So we think our democracy is prefigurative. We value it, like I've said before. That's not to say that it's all easy peasy. Some of our deliberations are really unsettling, and some of them are completely unsettled. So we don't have to agree on everything. You know, sometimes a plurality of outcomes is the best thing. We do think that this sort of end-user involvement is shaping the world as we would like to see it in the course of us trying to get there. And while everyone else has been plugging books, sorry, this is the end, we just want to plug our book, and there's some of our projects, and this book is on there. So can you zoom in on that, please? Because we use the royalties for this to fund some of our social events. It's very, very expensive, but academics and policymakers can afford it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. From Comensus and opening up new and incredible ways in a challenging context for engagement, we go back to the relationship between academia and industry, and we'll hand over to Professor Bernd Stahl, that is Professor of Critical Research in Technology and Director of the Center for Computing and Social Responsibility at the Montford University. And Bernd is also the coordinator of the Responsible Industry EU-funded project, that is a project that explores how private corporations can conduct their research and innovation activities in a responsible way. Please.
Thank you, Francesca. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Looks like it. Okay. The presentation I'm going to give now is supposed to be an example of a piece of responsible research and innovation. This is something that comes from the project, the Responsible Industry project that Francesca has just alluded to. The background to this whole project is that the majority of the discourse around responsible innovation is framed in terms of publicly funded research. So this is EU projects, nationally funded projects. The problem, though, with that is that the majority of innovation, maybe not research, but certainly the majority of innovation does not happen in universities. It's not publicly funded. It's privately funded. It happens in industry. So what we're trying to do in this project is we're trying to find out to what degree the discourse around RRI maps into or onto activities within industry, and whether there's something that industry can learn from the RRI discourse and something that the RRI discourse can learn from industry. So that's, I think, very briefly what we're trying to do here. And one of the first things we undertook in this project was to look at case studies. So instead of us writing case studies, which is what we normally do and what most of the RRI projects have done, in this case we wanted to not start with the prejudice about what is RRI, but we wanted to go out and talk to people who are industrially active, so who develop technologies, who undertake research and do innovations in industry, and to see what they think is responsible. And that led to 5 case studies, which we have on our project website, and I'm going to very briefly present one of those. This is the Ambiact project, or the Ambiact product. By the way, Doris Schroeder, who was also a member of this project, and her team, she was in charge of these bottom-up case studies. So, that's the preamble, and now I'm just going to talk about the project and the research and innovation that's happened there. The background to this is that due to demographic changes, more and more people are getting older and older, which is great, and we all want to be old. But at the same time, there are issues around caring for older people, and the idea is that many people want to stay at home, and they can stay at home if they have some sort of support. And in many cases, technologies are being promoted as ways of facilitating that. Now, one of those technologies that's been around since the 1980s is some sort of alarm system which allows people who have trouble when they're living at home alone to call help. And what you see here, the alarm button, that's something that you may have seen in many households of often single older people who are still very well able to cope on their own, but who may need help on occasion. Now, this has been around for a long time, but it raises a number of problems. Firstly, people don't necessarily like it. It reminds them of their own frailty. People are not particularly happy that they are required to have this sort of technology. And secondly, and probably more importantly, is the help button is something that you have to have with you in case you need help. So if you don't have it with you when you, for example, fall over, the whole thing doesn't do you any good. Again, old problem, we know that. The question then is, how can we deal with this? Or what might be technical solutions to overcome this? And one way of doing this is to have some sort of sensor system which allows to identify whether there's been a problem. And typically, this is then a sort of passive sensor where if something doesn't happen over a certain amount of time, an alarm is launched. So you may, well, probably all of you know that trains have similar technologies, often called the dead man button. So the train driver has to regularly press a button, and if they stop to do that because, for example, they've had a heart attack, the train stops. Now, this is based on the same principle. If something doesn't happen, at some point an alarm is raised. Again, same problem. People forget about it, or people don't like to do it because, for some reason, it just, again, it reminds them of their own frailty. The idea here was to integrate this sort of passive alarm into existing devices and technologies that people are already using anyway. The idea comes from the biggest organization in Germany that provides this sort of monitoring technology, the Johanniter Unfallhilfe, who took out a patent in the end of 2011. But what they then did is they worked very closely with potential users over several years, including a number of field trials in interviews at home. So they talked to people who use this sort of technology in order to find out what exactly it is they want. What are the problems that they've encountered with this type of technology, and how could it be addressed? They also did a public outreach activity, so they had a bunch of lectures in order to understand better what people need, but also in order to disseminate their insights. The outcomes of that was a set of requirements, which you can see here. And you can see that they distinguish between the customer requirements and the operator requirements. Now, the customers really don't want to be bothered with it. Now, it has to be unobtrusive. They shouldn't fear to forget it. It should be nice. Now, it shouldn't be an ugly thing in their home. It shouldn't cost a lot, and it shouldn't do anything beyond raise an alarm in case of emergency. The operators have a different set of requirements. Again, these are not particularly surprising. It should be easy, it should be cheap, no maintenance, and it should be compatible with what's already out there. Now, what they then came up with is basically a plug which you put between your wall plug and an appliance. You see the prototype here on the right, this black box, and you see it used on the picture on the left, where it's put into the electric plug, and then the kettle is plugged into that. So if somebody cooks or boils their water in the morning, then this is an indication that an activity is happening, which is basically the same thing as pushing a dead man button. The advantage this has is that people who have a regular routine, as many of us do, so many of us will boil their water for a cup of tea in the morning or get a cup of coffee or whatever it is, they can then just integrate this into their daily routine without doing anything further. So it's very easy to use. It's very unobtrusive. And in this sense, it's also something that the people highly appreciated. Why is this RRI? Why do we think it's RRI? Why does it count as an example of RRI? Well, first of all, in terms of RRI, it's a response to a demographic change, to one of the big challenges, to the grand challenges, in this case, the demographic change. It is an example of engagement with end users. So the stakeholders were involved in all the steps of creating the technology, which at the same time save costs and creates acceptance. There was this continuous feedback loop. They also used science education, as I said earlier, as something that not only benefits society, but that benefited themselves. So they realized by giving public lectures, they could actually engage with potential users, make them understand, and that was a win situation for themselves as well. So for us, this is interesting because it shows that RRI is not something good, or not only something good in itself, but this is a good example of showing that it makes business sense. It's something that benefited the company as well. From my perspective, what I also find interesting about it is that it's so unspectacular. When you hear about research and innovation, you always think, no, these are the big new things, the insights that are going to change the world. This is not going to change the world. But it's going to make some people's life a bit easier. Which I think is something that maybe if we did more often in research and innovation would actually be a good thing as a general point. And I think that the last observation worth making here is that you see, if you compare this picture here and the prototype I showed you earlier, what they've done is they've changed the color. Because the people who used this prototype like this found it ugly. Which again is not a big issue, it's not something that you should what you think is something you need to be very, very much worried about, but it is something to take into consideration with regards to are they actually going to use it. And as part of the feedback that they got, they changed the color initially to white, which turned out to not work either because it was too easily, the dirt was too easily visible on it. So it's now a light gray, which is, again, unspectacular, but an important demonstration of the sort of process of engagement that constitutes RRI. And I think I'll stop here. If you're interested in this example or in the other case studies that we've collected, you'll find them if you click on the website of the project, as well as a number of other activities and outputs that we've produced so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernd. So you had an overview of how engagement can shape inclusive RRI from an unexpected example of inclusive innovation in the Kalahari to an example of engagement and successful engagement in a highly challenging context to how to make responsible research and innovation in the classical context of innovation and relation between research, innovation, and industry. And I would like now, we have 15 minutes time for questions. I would like to open the floor for questions. Doris?
I would like to add something to, first of all, thanks to everybody, very exciting talks. I would like to add a bit of information to Bernd's presentation, because from an industry perspective, what came out from this case study was that they were able to enter the market faster. And from the perspective of industry, this is a very exciting development, because then obviously you have longer times. They have a patent, you see, so you have a longer time on the patent. So I really like this example of the Ambiac that you have given us, and it's a good example for industry benefit.
So, yeah, thank you for those talks. They're really inspiring, because I think this is such an important area. I'm sorry, I'm Manisha from the University of Oxford. I didn't introduce myself. I had a question regarding the San people case study. And I was wondering that when the local company approached you for the shared agreement, what was the actual reaction from the indigenous population? So we have this tendency to assume that they might be wholly reciprocal, but was that the case? And how was the actual agreement reached? So that's rather broad, but it would be interesting to hear about.
Ek dink dit is 'n lang proses, lang pad gewees. En wat daar gebeur, die dokter Gerika het diermidde van 'n dame met die naam Fiona Asher in Namakoland. En sy het daar gewerk, sy het die plan daar by die namas gevind. En die reaksie by die namas was, hulle gebruik die plant, maar die kennis kom van die sanmense. En dis hoekom dokter Gerika na ons toe gegaan. En so die reaksie daarvan van die mense, die sanmense was opgewonde dat hulle aan ons ken aan die saak, omdat die kennis kom van die sanmense. So en enkele van die sanmense, ons is so bly dat hulle dat die dinge die in die moderne samelewing het die dinge heeltemal verander, dat mens moet saamwerk, dat hulle na ons toe gekom het. En ons waardeer dit dat hulle ons gekom het.
It's quite a long story, but according to Reverend, there were different people who, well, firstly there was people working with the Nama communities, which is actually quite close to the San people, and then the San was also approached, firstly the Nama people in terms of then their knowledge of the product or of the plant, and then later on the San people, but the San people were very happy to share their experience on what they've used the plant for in the past. And it's also quite interesting that there were other kind of benefits coming from the plant as well. Not only for teething or kogut, what we said, which is the chewing part, but also, there were other kind of effects that was coming from that as well. So coming from the sand, they were very pleased to share their knowledge. Does it answer your question?
Yes, it does. And if it's okay, can I just add another mini question onto that? It was said that there was mutual benefit to the people. So aside from this preservation and appreciation of the local knowledge by the company, I was wondering whether there were any other benefits derived by the San people, so the actual community of people who hosted this knowledge.
Wat daar gebeur is, toe ons onderhande met benefit sharing, met die behulp ook van ons regspersoon, het ons einde van die dag gevind dat, omdat ons is die kennishouer, maar die names is, die gebrek, hulle die plante baie lang gebrek, dat ons nie gaan dit net vir ons die benefit sharing met die HE, dit aangaan sonder die names. Ons teken die ooreenkomst met hulle, maar ons het ook geteken ooreenkomst met die names, dat as ons die benefit sharing kry, dan gee ons hulle 50 ook na hulle toe.
What Reverend says there is, it's actually a little bit more complex than that. It was the traditional knowledge was held by the San, but it's actually practiced at the moment still by the Nama people. They still plant the plant and so on. So when it came to the benefit sharing contract that was signed, it was actually done between the San and the Nama and as well as the company who did approach them. So it's actually a trial contract being signed to share the benefit of whatever they are going to do with the plant, with the medicine, with the pill.
Lisa, thanks.
I've got kind of a follow-up question to that, and it's for all participants.
Lisa, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sorry. I'm Lisa Mlihi-Shoja. I'm from Comensus. I help facilitate the project. And you've come up with some really good RRI examples, but a couple of them are actually profit-making. And I wondered how those profits are actually reinvested for the benefit of the end users, and if that money actually comes back to those people that helped you develop in the first place, or if that money actually keeps within the business that produces them.
By die ooreenkoms bevat al die presentasies wat ons besluit het. En die maatskappy, wanneer hulle geld maak, die wens maak uit hierdie produkte, dan gee hulle wat ons aan ooreenkoms geteken, betaal oor na die Sanraad. En die Sanraad van hulle kant af betaal hulle dan die gedeelte van die names na hulle. Dit is hoe ons dit werk, ja. Dit werk uit presentasies uit.
I hope it's going to answer your question. In terms of the contract that was signed between the company and the SAN Council, when there's profits made, it will go to the SAN Council, which then also give a portion of that back to the normal communities again. So it's all exchange of money. But yeah, it's at the moment, it's not all about money. That's what Reverend says. But there is some benefits in terms of cash.
Maar ons het ook gesê dat dit gaan net nie oor geld nie. As daar ander voordele is, soos vir opleiding, vir ons kinders betrokke te raak aan die navorsing, dit is ook deel van benefit sharing.
Yes, in terms of benefit sharing, it's not about hard cash is quite helpful, but also it comes to educational opportunities to open that in for the younger generations to come and study and do different kind of research and become part of the research community as well.
I don't know who's first, but Roger, please. Sorry.
My first one isn't, I'm not sure if it's really it's half a question to Bernd first. You know, as a person with English blood, I'm sure every Englishman should be incredibly proud of an invention and a patent which is based around the tea-making patterns of the English. So to some degree, I sort of wonder how it could be transferred to other nations which don't regard having tea as such a central part. No, but I think it's fantastic. That's not really a question. I sort of wondered whether the Queen has written to the patent holder. It being,
It's a German.
oh, it's a German invention. Well, anyway. Okay, but I think my real question, partially a comment, but just directed to Comensus. You know, I've always been talking about community involvement with research. You know, I've talked about it, but this is hearing about it at a new level of practicality. And the fact of the community invading, not invading, but actually colonizing part of the university and the mutual benefits. I'm just wondering to what degree other disciplines such as social welfare, anthropology, and others would really benefit, especially from target communities. And I think the difficulty is when you have a huge community, you've then got to identify a community within the community. But just thinking of how universities can become more relevant, I think it's a phenomenon. It puts a huge question as to how could you roll this out and which other disciplines would be most amenable to that. So I'm just airing a question of my own. I don't know whether you'd like to respond.
I mean, in terms of anthropology, well, one of the places we went looking to look for knowledge that might back up what we were trying to achieve was in sort of anthropology and ethnography. And I'm going to hopelessly forget people's names, but there are some really good American scholars, for instance, who almost in a similar way but different try to look at how the university can become more of an asset to communities and have done sort of critically minded anthropological ethnographic projects. And sometime by the end of the day, I'll remember the author that I'm thinking of. There's an anthologized book that I'm aware of that's got a number of these projects in it. I mean, I wanted to say something a little about the question about profit, because I think in some sense it's not where we're at. Because, you know, if we wanted to politicise the debate for a minute, I think the way in which universities are being shaped by neoliberalism is taking us away from some of the virtues that might better support this territory that we're on. But that said, and I don't think this is a contradiction of that, when we've actually looked into this very issue, for instance, now payment to people for their time and this sort of thing, money hasn't come anywhere near the top of the list of what drives people's motivation to get involved. The desire to actually be part of something that makes a difference, realises a change, produces something that's of tangible value, is right at the top of why people are involved and maybe sustains people's involvement. But I suppose our little act of subversion, if it is one, is to try and release up some of the university's financial money, either through grant capture or whatever, to smuggle that back to the people who get involved. We aren't always able to do that. And what we found is the people who work for free or will do more work than we ever wanted them to do, even when we've got money to pay them. So we've written a paper on this called Not Just the Cash Nexus, to try and sort of explore some of that. That said, we have created some jobs where we've got substantive posts that are people who started off as, if you like, patients in the health service, and are now paid researchers. And we've done more of that on a more sessional basis, so people dip in and out of it. But the enemy of some of that is our tax and benefits system, which in some senses, it is a very real impediment to some of that work. But we could talk about that all day long.
Thank you. Lady here. Hi, Randi Weilmichrath, National Contact Point Science Wisdom for Society from Germany, DLR. I have a question about the last talk, responsible industry, and my question goes to Doris Schröder, because you just said that the product came much faster to the market, and I didn't really catch why. Was this because of public engagement? So if you could elaborate on that a bit, that would be great, because I just wondered, because if this would be true, this would be just a great argument in favor of RRI, because Horizon 2020 talks so much about impact and bringing products to the market, especially faster. So I would like to know more about that. Thank you.
Is it okay if I answer, or do you want to? I collected the case studies. It was something that the CEO of Oldentech, which is the company producing the Ambiact, said to me very early on, and like you, I found this very interesting. And the policy officer of the project was also immediately excited, because then you can see the industry benefits. But obviously one can't generalize necessarily whether this will be the case for others. But the reason they gave why they believe they've entered the market much more quickly is because all the modifications that are normally done in the pilot, when there was no user engagement, that takes a very long time. So if you develop the product and then you go into the pilot phase and have to make lots of modifications, that simply makes the process longer. And they have worked with a local university where they have a living lab, and in addition they worked with a nursing home. And the lady we saw on the picture is the mother of one of the two developers, and that's possibly why they also had this close relationship so quickly. And it was a statement from them that it was much faster, because and I find it very obvious that this is the case. If you go to a market with a product that has not been developed with user engagement, and then you have the pilot phase, and then you have to make the modifications, it will take longer. Yeah.
I would like, if there are no other questions, I would like to, okay. Oh, sorry. So I'm very sorry. I cannot see you.
It's no problem. I don't want to keep us too long. I can sense that everyone is probably looking forward to their lunch. But my name is Kate Miller. I'm at the Centre for Applied Bioethics at the University of Nottingham. I'd just like to say that I really enjoyed this session, and I think there's some great work being done in these projects. And I can see, this is a little bit of a naughty question, I can see how these projects talk to what RRI should be. And I can see some really excellent work in terms of the inclusion discussions in the first project. But I wonder, what does the RRI theoretical work do for you? I'm not sure how much it's given you, which is interesting because there's quite a lot of investment in some of those projects. And the second question, I suppose, really quickly is, part of that is that the final presentation around this great plug innovation is, are we implying that RRI will become a set of criteria, a label, a set of standards? Therefore, this plug is responsible, but another type of plug is not.
Okay, first question, what are we getting from the theory? Well, I guess the theory provides us with ways of categorizing possible aspects of responsible innovation that we can reflect on. My view on RRI is that it's, if it's useful, if the theory of RRI is useful, then it's useful in the sense that it allows us to think differently about lots of activities which have been around for a long time. So responsible innovation, if it's engagement, if it's open access, if it's gender sensitivity, none of that is new. But I think what it can do is it can combine various activities in a way that's novel and gives us better insights into how we generally can think about about innovation and research in ways that is conducive to society. There's a longer paper behind that which we can talk about. The second question then is, well, are we going to have the responsible plug? And you can go to Tesco's and buy a responsible and an irresponsible plug. And to some degree, I think the answer to that is yes. So I think if RRI is supposed to have societal relevance, then this means that it will have to be visible, that people need to be able to recognize it, and that it allows both researchers and consumers to orient themselves in terms of their decisions. So I think one of the, and there are lots of ways in which this could happen. So if you look at some of the European Union publications, there are, for example, suggestions to integrate RRI into procurement decisions. So you will only be allowed to bid for European procurement money if you follow a certain set of criteria. And I think something along those lines to me, would make a lot of sense to be rolled out more widely. So I think something like a standard of RRI that a company could sign up to, could be certified against, similar to a quality assurance standard, would be something that I think practically might make a lot of sense. It will allow companies to differentiate themselves, and it, I think, would give it social relevance. But that's, I think, a question which the 300 people who are here today and tomorrow probably want to have a lot of debate about.
David.
Yeah, I mean, I think that last question was a very important question. I mean, I think if you think about the public space, I mean, I'm on the board of our Technology Innovation Agency in South Africa. When we say to people who come to us, we want to see social impact, you tell that to a researcher, they'll show you social impact. It's not, they will do that. If they know that's what you want, they'll give it to you. The question is how to differentiate what is social impact and what the criteria of that are. And that seems to me to be the next phase of this. And I think that there may be some general principles, but what is social impact and what is social relevance is highly context specific. And I think that those things will have to be defined by different national entities in that national context, or indeed regional authorities, or maybe even city authorities now that are engaged so much more in innovation activities. So I think it's not enough to say your research should be socially relevant. You can say that, but you also need very clear criteria and assessment about what you mean by that, and it will have to be socially and I think temporally as well. What may be relevant today may not be relevant tomorrow. So I think the big challenge is putting some teeth to what is that social relevance, I think, is the next stage of our challenge.
Well, we are perfectly on time, a few minutes late. So thank you, everybody, for joining us and for actively participating in this. And I wish you to enjoy your meal. And thank you. Bye.